right, so many authors assume they have to do research for their book. And so what happens when I ask them why they believe that, they look at me like this, right? They give me any of you Canadians, Trailer Park Boys, they give me that look like they had never even thought to question the notion that they have to do research. Yes, that's what I'm saying, is that you do not have to do research for your book. Or I should say, do not assume that you have to do research for your book. You might, but it's not obvious. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It is absolutely not a requirement. There is not anything written anywhere that says, if you don't research for your book, it's a total failure and a disaster. All right. So let's go over the two reasons to do research for their book. You know enough to write this book, but you want to add sources and citations to make the book more persuasive to a specific audience, right? So for example, if you're writing a book for a scientific audience and they would expect a lot of double-blind placebo studies to be cited, then yeah, you want to put those in, right? Or if you are writing for a technical audience and they expect you to, you're making claims where they would expect you to cite evidence, then absolutely you should do that, right? But how many of you read personal development books? Like read David Goggins' book and be like, well, he didn't cite any evidence in here. Not one person has said that. And if they did, I'm actually laughing to think what David would say to them. It would be kind of amazing, actually. I want to try and put someone up to that in a Q&A one time. David, you didn't cite any studies in your book. The second reason to do research is that you don't know enough and you need to learn more to make your book complete. And when I say you don't know enough, I don't mean you're a babe in the woods that has never heard of project management. But a lot of times for people will start writing their book and they'll realize they have gaps in their knowledge. Those of you who are in the Facebook group saw last night, I finished the vomit draft on a parable that I'm writing. And it's over a subject that I know very well, but there were two very specific areas that I realized I had big gaps in my knowledge. And so I had to go read a couple books to kind of fill those gaps. Now, I didn't put the research in because it's parable, but there's nothing wrong with understanding that I need to fill gaps in my knowledge in a field that I'm very good at. Nothing wrong with that. Now, here's the bad news. There is not a right way to make a book research plan. This is not a paint by numbers thing. There is no exact checklist I can give you. The good news, though, is that the basic research tips I'm about to give you are the same for either person, one or two, right? Whether you're citing lots of studies to fulfill your audience's expectations, or you're filling gaps in your knowledge, right? Yeah, so I got 9 tips. First tip, get your positioning and outline tight first before you research, right? So with an outline, a good outline, that way you'll know the data you need, where your information gaps are, what sources support your claims, et cetera. These are all very, very important things. And without a solid positioning, at least a basic outline, you're gonna spend a lot of time floundering and going down blind alleys and doing all kinds of work that you don't need to do, right? Very, very important to have a good outline and positioning. And in fact, let me actually stop here and say something. If you don't feel that you know your subject well enough to do a good positioning and outline, then that means you don't know enough to write that book, at least right now, right? And so, and I have absolutely started books like that. Where I'm like, let me see if I can give an example. Okay, I'll give a really good example. I think probably the best book I've ever written, it sold the least, is a book called Mate, How to Become the Man Women Want. And it was like, I hated all the stupid pickup artist books and all the scammy books that all these douchebags who don't know anything about women or relationships or any of that stuff would write. So I wrote I wanted to write the one that was like a guy who was proud of himself and wasn't a scammer and wanted to just improve and be a great guy. What would he want to read? And so I started writing that, and I realized, the stuff I knew really well, but that was 40% of the book. And I was like, oh man, there's so much here that I don't know. And so I paired up with a guy, Dr. Jeffrey Miller, who is one of the world's premier evolutionary psychologists and behavioral specialists. And all of the sort of things that I didn't know, the gaps in my knowledge, I mean, that was what he'd spent his whole life on. So we became a really good team. Now, I could have written that book without him. Either I would have written a different book, or I would have had to learn all that, right? So make sure, and either one works. I could have changed the positioning to write a different book and not something so comprehensive, or I could have spent a long time learning that. Either one's fine, but understand that is a possibility, okay? And if you're freaking out like, oh my God, I don't know enough to write my book, you're probably not that bad. Like you got to understand, like this book was huge and super comprehensive, and it was deeply researched and all kinds, like intelligence, all kinds of stuff that you have to be an expert in to write about, which I wasn't. Tip number 2, make a research plan. So your plan is going to vary widely depending on whether you are an expert who knows your field well, or you need to learn about certain parts of your field and fill gaps before writing about it, right? For the expert, and most of you are experts in your field, okay? You may not be the best expert. It doesn't mean you're not an expert, right? I'm not the best well, shit, I might be the best expert at writing nonfiction books at this point, at least teaching people. But I definitely wasn't 5 years ago. But I was way better than most people, and I knew what well enough to teach people like you guys. Now I'm way better. But anyway, your research plan is probably going to be short, to the point, and filling in gaps. You're refreshing your memory, you're filling in gaps if you're a total expert. If you're a non-expert, your research plan is probably going to be much longer. There's just a lot more work to do, right? Which again, if you come up with a research plan and it's really long, then you should relook at your positioning to see if you're writing the right book. Also, for non-experts, it can entail interviewing experts and reading lots of books and articles and surveying the whole field that you're writing about. If you're a non-expert writing a book about a field, one of the absolute best ways to do that is to do what we call a survey book, and to kind of survey the entire field and kind of learn about it as a novice, and then write like an intro or survey book. I don't think that's what many of you are doing. I'm going to eventually, it won't be until next year or the year after, do a master class on how to come up with book ideas and research them for non-experts. But that doesn't really, because that is kind of its own thing. I don't think that I've read all the stuff for the introductions for most of you. The vast majority of you are overwhelming experts in your field. Right, if you're a non-expert, this might be your future, reading a lot of books, right? All right, now, generally speaking, the expert can do the research before they start writing, or during, or even after, depending on what you need, right? If you're just, if you know your field really well, like a buddy of mine, Ben Hardy, he wrote a book called Willpower Doesn't Work. He's got another one coming out called Personality Isn't Permanent. I helped him, I edited his book and helped him. He just did his research after, because he knows his field so well. His research was just citations. Felt like, okay, I know this study, let's put this here, that's it. So that's totally valid. If you're a non-expert, you really should do your research before you start writing, as that what you learn is going to form the basis of the book. Now, you can get stuck in the research trap. If you spend 5 years researching, then it's probably writing the wrong book. Third tip, how do you start researching? I always begin by asking the internet. Some basic internet search best practices, though. Use a variety of search terms, right? So if you're writing a book on childhood development, you want to look at child psychology, social emotional learning, which is part of childhood development. Like, it's a really broad field. So you want to make sure that you're looking at a lot of different angles, right? Also, and as you refine your knowledge, refine your searches, right? Like Winnicott theories, like D.W. Winnicott's a big childhood person. Milton Erickson's psychosocial theories. Like, as you refine, as you read and understand, you go more and more niche, right? Pretty basic. And this also means going way past the first, not even the first result on Google, the first page on Google. At this point in a lot of fields is very gamed. I like to go down rabbit holes. And in fact, I almost never trust Wikipedia, except like for non-controversial stuff. Like, if I want to read Wikipedia for like the mating habits of wasps, it's probably a pretty good intro, right? But if you want to read Wikipedia about Donald Trump, it's like, ugh, I don't know, you know, or the New York Times, don't know. I'll obviously make sure and check your sources, right? If you are, which at this point is really hard to figure out. If you're doing controversial issues, it's really hard to figure out what a good or bad source is, or a valid or invalid source. I'll tell you the secret to this. I go read primary literature, whether it's the actual study or the actual thing. Do not spend that much time reading people's ideas about Aristotle. Go read Aristotle. And you will, I'm telling you, most of you are pretty experienced. You probably know this. You will be shocked when you read primary sources about the difference between the primary source and the commentary on the source. I cannot think of a field. I've never seen a counterexample where my opinion about the field before I dove deep into it and my opinion after were not radically different. And every field where I've really dove in and learned the field, I've realized that almost everyone who's a quote expert in the field doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. Like 80 to 95% of the field are idiots, depending on what field it is. Next one. This is a big one. Read books. I like to use the internet to find the best books in each field and then dive into those books. The reason is because, as you guys know, someone who spends the time to write a book is almost always a good expert in the field and is going to really share a bunch of knowledge. Now, not every book is good. Of course, you got to kind of find the ones, but it's hard. I can't think of a field that I've ever studied where the books haven't been better. I know there are counterexamples like digital marketing because it changes so much. But even in that field, like I'm telling you, the best books I've read in marketing are like 80 years old. They're like all the old school direct response copywriters wrote these incredible books. You just have to change all their tactics, because like you're not sending shit in the mail anymore. But all the way, their psychology, the way they broke it down is timeless and universal. Next tip, talk to experts. Once I have a decent basic understanding of a field, then I go to the experts with my questions, not before. It is annoying as hell. Like I'm an expert, right? And so when people come to me and they're like, hey, should I publish a book with a traditional publisher or self-publish? I don't know why I did that in a Southern accent, but I did. I guess because I'm from Kentucky. Then I'm like, well, did you read the 3,000 word blog post I wrote about that? Because it tells you everything you need to know. And so instead, if you come to me, you've read all this stuff and you say, hey, look, I'm considering traditional versus self. Here's my situation, and I'm having problems understanding the best answer because of these cofactors. Then I'm like, oh, this is great. I can really help you dive in, right? That experts love it when they know you've done a little bit of research and you can speak their language. They hate it when when you ask them to explain fundamentals. Make sense? Cool. But once you find a good expert, it condenses your learning curve by 10x. That's why you guys joined this. Because even though we gave you all the information for free, it's sort of like we gave you all the bricks for free, but building, like our expertise is the mortar. And you can go, make your own mortar and learn how to lay mortar, or you can just come to us and say, all right, lay the mortar, right? Because the stuff in between the bricks it just takes, in any field, a long time to figure that out. Tip 6, collect survey data. This is very, 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 very optional. Some authors love to collect surveys though. I've never done this, but we had a lot of authors, not a lot, maybe 5% of our authors. This is, which like considering they do so many different things, actually a lot. It's a plurality. This is only applicable in certain books, so don't assume you need this. But for example, if you're doing a book about trends or anything like that, then, or what people think, then surveys are very important. Tip number 7, organize as you go. This could be its own masterclass, but I like to stay as organized as possible as I do research. There are many ways to organize, many. Like you can Google organize your research and that could be its own, my God, I can't even imagine that rabbit hole. I tend to keep it simple and not use, and I use the software program Notion, which is very much like Evernote, but way better. And because it has nested tables and it's just like you can clip off the web, and there's a learning curve for that. But once you get it, it makes things really, really easy for me, at least. But if you want to use a spreadsheet, that's great. So like I'll have one page that's the database, and then each article of the book goes in its own page, and I have kind of a whole way I do it. I'm not going to, well, this is kind of what it looks like. So like book notes and ideas. So you have like, this is for the parable I just finished. So the main character has a backstory. The book's about the decision to take to do MDMA therapy, as MDMA assisted psychotherapy, and so like his backstory, the client SOP. So this is like what the client gets who does MDMA. Then the outlines there. Then one-off notes. These are articles that or things that people wrote that I read, and then source notes like Peter Levine, Alice Miller. Like they're both big in trauma. Body Keeps Scores, whatever. These are like notes I had about specific set pieces. Pretty simple. This is just my system. It's not the best. It's just something that I use. It's simple and works. Right? Make sense? All right. Cool. Yeah. Hey, so hold your questions to the end, and then I'll do Q&A. Tip number 8. Set a deadline and stop early. Excessive research never, ever, ever, ever makes a better book. Now, key on the word excessive there. In my experience, I used to say 80%. When we feel 80% done, you should stop. I'm actually more at the point now where I feel 50% done, I stop. Now, I'm talking about researching fields where I know enough. I have a foundation. If I have no foundation, then I tend to go a little bit further to make sure my foundation's solid, and that I haven't gone down a weird rabbit hole. But like, for example, the MDMA assisted psychotherapy parable, like that book, I know that field really well. And so I didn't have to do a whole lot of research. I just had to fill some gaps. So like, I like to find what you need and then stop, right? So how do you know when you're done? When you have enough data, anecdotes, and examples to satisfy your outline. That's it, right? It's very, very, very common. Like, I'm trying to think of who in this group has done that. There's 3 or 4 of you who have used research to procrastinate and, does that say deal writing? It should be delay writing. I did not proofread these slides very well. It's very common to yeah. People are like, you're supposed to be a writer. I'm like, I'm a writer, motherfucker, not a speller, okay? Like, you want to hire a speller, they're called proofreaders. It's very common to use research to procrastinate and delay writing. Beat this by setting a research deadline. Like, so you say, all right, May 15th I start, June 15th I stop, and then I like to even stop early, right? Because it kind of makes me feel like I was ahead of the curve. But what if I have to have more info to prove my points? If you feel like you have to go out of your way to prove your points, you have one of 2 problems. Listen to this, because it's very important for a lot of you. You're not confident enough in your points, or you're not confident enough in your reader's ability to understand your claims, right? So let me go back. Either you're not confident in the points you're making, or you're not confident that they're going to get what you're saying. If you have the first problem, right, that you're not confident enough in your points, then you need to adjust your arguments. All the research in the world won't help support a weak claim. If you don't believe your claim, no one else is going to. Right? So either change the claim or find more proof. If you're having the second problem, which is you're not confident enough your reader will get it, then ask yourself, if I knew nothing about this subject, what would it take to convince me? Right? Make sense? Cool. Tip number 9, write your first draft. When you think you're close, start your vomit draft. And then finish the vomit draft, and then come back and fill holes and do more research before you start editing. This is exactly what I'm going to do for the book I just finished. I would say I'm probably, I would say I have at least another couple of days of research to do in cumulative. And, because I'm setting the book aside for like 2-3 weeks, I'm going to come back to it. It'll be very fresh and I'll see the holes. They'll be clear as day to me then, because it's like I'm reading a new book. And then I'll mark them before I do anything and say, I got to figure out more about somatic release for trauma here. I got to figure out more about, whatever, this here, etc. And then I know the sources, or I have an idea of the sources. I'll go look at them. I'll do what I need, come back, fill that stuff in. That becomes the make it right end. All right, now let's take questions.
Yeah, I got one here from Mark, so I'm starting at the bottom. What do you recommend we do to find case studies outside of our clients to prove a point we're making? For instance, Chris Guillebeau's books are always packed with tons of stories like Pursuit of Happiness. I'm not familiar with the book.
Yeah, I am. So that's good. I would. People always ask, what's the ratio to client to non-clients? If you can do your book with only clients and it doesn't feel promotional or weird, that's okay. It's not that big of a deal. So don't feel like you have to have a ton of non-client examples. The way to find non-client examples, here's something I like to do. Or I actually, I don't like to do, but this is some sneaky advice I've given to friends or other clients of ours. If you want examples of people who did it wrong, go find literally take your competitor, whatever they're called, and type in competitor scam, like whatever the competitor's name is, right? Their name and scam, and then find people upset with your competitor and reach out to them. And then like, because you'll get tons of examples of like people screwing shit up, right? So that's a really good way to find bad examples. To find good examples, you probably know your field pretty well. And if you have friends who run businesses similar to you, then reach out to them. You know, they'll think it's amazing. They'll love it if you're like going to profile one of their clients. Or another thing you could do is you could reach out to someone that you want to be a client and tell them you're doing research for a book and bring up like, you know, have you guys ever done this right or whatever? I'd love to have you, to interview you for the book or whatever. Most people who don't get interviewed for books a lot, like I'd rather put a bullet in my brain and be interviewed for another fucking book. But like most industries, people don't get interviewed by a lot. So like they'll think it's really cool. And then you build a relationship with that person. Now you can get it in. Did that answer the question?
Cool. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Tucker.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
All right, here's one from Patrick Donahue. Very curious on steps to partner with people that can contribute content. I don't know if you have any advice on that, how to find them.
Patrick, so when you say contribute content, what do you mean? Because that means a lot of things.
Well, I found it really fascinating when you mentioned that you reached out to it sounded like a PhD in a field and had them fill in some of the content that you felt lacking in your book.
Hold on. He didn't fill in content. We partnered together. And so he was like a full partner on this book. I got a huge 7-figure advance for this from Little Brown, and he got half of it. So this was not like, hey, throw me some stuff, you know?
Was this a cold relationship?
Yeah, it was. We knew one person in common.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt. So that's what I'd be curious about. Like if we find other people that we would like to help contribute or be a co-author, like what were kind of maybe the steps you took to maybe think about that, and how did you decide on choosing them to be a co-author?
So we're talking about different things. Contribute and co-author are fundamentally different things. All right. So contribute, what I would do, if it's contribution you're looking for, I would reach out to people and either ask them to write something and talk to them on the phone, get real clear on what their contribution would be, the scope of it, what you expect, what they get from it, etc. Generally speaking, it'd be short. The easier way to do it, especially if you're going after busy people, is to just get on the phone and interview them, and then you write up their contribution and then send it to them for approval. Like most people, if you're like, can you do an hour on the phone so I can, get your case study or your contribution for the book? I'll do the writing. I'll send it to you. You can improve it, change it all you want. They'll be like, oh hell yeah, of course. But if you're like, hey, will you write me a 3,000 word chapter on my book? They're going to like melt down. Or first off, they're going to say, fuck you, that's bullshit. Or even if they're excited, there's like, oh my God, I got to write a book chapter, right? It's like, that's a lot of work you're asking me to do, And it's pretty fucking selfish of you, dude, honestly, Patrick, to ask me that. I'm kidding. I'm messing with you. But but that is kind of the way I feel when someone, and I get the requests a lot, so I'm a little different.
Yeah.
But when someone's like, will you contribute something to my book? It's like the days of where that used to be a big deal are gone. And now it's more of an annoyance, right? But if you frame it as, hey, look, you're an expert in field X. I'm doing a book on field X. I would love to interview you about some certain things and put that in the book. And of course, I'll talk about you, profile you, I'll talk about your company. That's like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to be interviewed for a book. I'm very important. You see the difference? Does that make sense? And then from there, especially if it's on a cold outreach, if it's someone you know well and you talk to them ahead of time, whatever, then you can maybe get them to write something and do that. Does all make sense? This is in terms of a contribution.
Yep.
All right, for co-author, that's a different game.
Okay.
That's where it's like, and again, so let me just mention this. For outreach, I think I try to think about everything strategically. So I would reach out to people I want to build relationships with, people who have higher status in my field than me, people who talk to a group of people I don't, but I want to be in front of, people who have large social media followings or large followings of some sort. Like, think strategically about it, right? Or people who are wickedly smart that no one knows about, people who I can partner with in some other way, and this is my in. Like those are strategic things. Same with co-author. Think strategically about it. And then it's like, there needs to be a why. Like, why are you asking them for you first to be a co-author? Are they bringing something big to the table? Then, okay, then it makes sense. And then there needs to be a why for them, right? So like, in Dr. Miller's case for that book, Dr. Miller, an academic professional, very high status in that field, very well renowned, one of the most cited researchers in that field. So he brought a lot of gravitas and heft to me, right? Whereas, like, what did I bring to him? He wasn't getting a 7-figure advance. He's a fucking academic. He wasn't getting any advance. So like, all of a sudden he goes from no one cares about him writing a book to getting multiple $100,000, like a lot. And he gets someone like me who knows how to talk to an audience that he can't talk to. And he gets like kind of all that kind of like media, that sort of prestige, right? So I was trading on his status in a certain area, and he was trading on mine. We were kind of, the idea was the two of us together would create a synergy in that regard. It didn't really work out that way, but it wasn't because the idea was bad. There was a lot of other factors for us. But you'll see this every now and then with like, let me think of a good example. I think Adam Grant just wrote a book with, what's her face, Sheryl Sandberg or something. Like, you see stuff like that. What I would do I don't know how, like, what you're thinking, but I've seen this a lot, and it works really well, where someone like who's mid-level in a field goes to someone really high level in a field and says, let's partner on a book, let's co-author a book. I'll do, almost all the work. I'll interview you a couple times, put that in. You can, edit with me. You get full author, like full author credit, everything, but I'll do most of the work. That can really work, or vice versa. If you're a way higher status than someone else and they want to do a bunch of the work, you can trade that. You know what I'm saying? You got to think really strategically about it. Okay. And then, that's just one thing they're bringing, access to companies, access to people, access to whatever. Does this all make sense?
That's very helpful. Thank you.
All right. Next.
I got one more in here from, it's kind of buried, from Art. What's your opinion on providing research information that speaks both for and against in order to further substantiate your argument?
So I think it was Charlie Munger who said, if you can't recite the best argument against your position, then you don't actually know your position. I love that. Like, I like talking about, okay, so for example, I own a self-publishing company. And in this book and in the blog post that talks about traditional versus self, I talk about the 3 to 5 cases where traditional is better, right? And so, like, because I do that, people who are borderline come to me for advice all the time, huge fucking names, because they know I'm going to tell them the truth, right? And so you are way more credible as an author if you can recite the strongest arguments of the other side, right? And that you actually address those directly as opposed to creating a straw man.
Perfect.
Answer your question?
Yes, you did. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Tucker, here's a question from Dave, and I'm going to paraphrase this because it's more broadly. A lot of people want to know about how to use endnotes and footnotes, particularly if they want to put in technical information that probably doesn't belong in the body of the book. I know you hate this question, but here you are.
Do you want to answer it, Hal, so I don't have to get angry about it?
No, you're the one on the hot seat, man.
All right, so do not put fucking footnotes in your book. unless you are writing like a legal, unless you are coming out of a field where footnotes are normal and accepted. And I can only think of like legal, maybe engineering, physics. There's like a couple academic fields where footnotes are a thing. Do not have fucking footnotes in your book. They're the worst. People hate them. If you want endnotes, okay, no one's going to read them except for certain fields. So if you're coming out of a field where endnotes are a regular thing and you want to put them in, great. But do you know why editors invented endnotes? Do you guys know why? Do you know this, Hal?
I don't.
So Jeremy told me this. Editors invented endnotes so that they could figure out a way to cut all of the fucking masturbatory bullshit out of authors' books without them thinking it's gone. And so like literally, Jeremy's my editor at Simon & Schuster for the books that I did with them. And he's like, still like, I'm godfather to his kids. We're still good friends. And he's like, yeah, dude, he's like, whenever we get an author going through who's like just in love with themselves and it turned in a 100,000 word book and we got to get it to 70, then we'll take the 30 we need to cut. We'll cut half of it and put the other 15,000 in endnotes. And I'm like, oh, that's fucking brilliant. So like, here's what I would challenge all of you. I don't mean endnotes like an appendix is different. Appendix is like your list of citations or extended reading or anything like that. That's fine. That's like, call it sources, right? Endnotes are like, I have more to say on this, but it didn't belong in the main body because it's all about making me look smart, right? That's really what's going on. If what you have to say is not strong enough to be in the main text, why the fuck does it need to be at the end of the book? There are sometimes answers for that. There really are. But 9 times out of 10, it's your own ego.
All right, here's one from Jess. I'm just going to paraphrase this. If you interview a bunch of people, do you have to quote them and cite them, or can you just sort of incorporate what you learn and write it?
You can do either one or both. It depends. Now, okay, if you interview me for a book and like I say a bunch of smart things and you take those exact words and put them in your book and don't quote me, I'm going to be pissed. You're going to hear from me, right? But if you like interview me like on a background research and you take what you learned and you phrase it your own way, fair game. That's kind of the big thing. Although, and also it depends on the field. Like if you want to quote big names and high status people in your book to make it the knowledge seem more relevant and higher status, that's great. Totally do that. You know, like so many people come to me for blurbs because I'm a 4-time New York Times bestselling author. And like, you know, like someone's like, I'm writing a book about commercial real estate. Will you give me a blurb? I'm like, what? I didn't even negotiate the lease for my office. Like, I don't know anything about commercial real estate. The fuck do I have to say about this? It's uncredible bullshit. Any opinion I have on commercial real estate is nonsense and you should ignore it. But it's like kind of trading status stuff. So I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. If they're a friend of mine, I'll be like, and then I don't ever say anything about the book. My blurbs are always like, you should listen to Jimmy because he's a smart guy. But to answer your question, you can do either or both. I like to do my research and synthesize everything into my own voice. I have a very strong voice, and so that works well for me. There are times where I cannot say something better than someone told me, then I quote them. Give them credit. All right.
All right, here's one from Leah. I love this because it's got both Kanye and Taylor Swift in it. So Kanye wrote about Taylor Swift, said she approved it. She then denied it. So Leah's worried about having somebody approve something and then like she wants to talk to her doctor to get some information for her book. And then what happens if that person denies it later? It seems like, is there a legal protection she should have? Seems pretty far out. But.
Legal protection from what?
Person says like, yo, I didn't say that.
Okay. So what do they get? legal protection from what? From them saying they didn't say it, or from them
Yeah, like,
suing you? Because those are different things.
Right. Like, so, I mean, it wouldn't be like slander because I'm not saying something bad about them. It's just they would say something that would support my book. And then, you know, say I'm on the Today Show talking about it. And they're like, oh, we didn't say that.
So that happening is pretty rare. It does happen. Pretty rare. What's your book about?
It's a memoir about a genetic disorder. And this was my doctor, you know, my personal doctor for this, you know, genetic disorder that I have.
Okay, so I would treat this like a journalist.
But it is a memoir. Yeah.
So I would treat this like a journalist would. So when you interview people, record it, and then keep the recordings.
Well, hello, that's exactly what Kanye and Taylor did, remember? And then he played it and said, proved it.
I mean, I don't follow
Oh, you don't? And then they
pop
sued them.
culture.
Okay.
I have 3 kids and a wife that I really like. So I don't.
Oh, I know, me too.
I have no
my
space in my
husband.
life for Kanye or Taylor Swift.
All right, gotcha.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but like, Leah, and I don't mean this disrespectfully at all. Those two are performers on a stage, and I don't necessarily mean musicians, although of course they are. They are they're minstrels playing out a drama that for news outlets that monetize that. You are not that. Like and like if you're worried about this, absolutely keep your interview people, keep your recordings, keep your notes like any journalist would, right? But like the idea that there's going to be a big drama about this is just not, it's not going to happen. If you're worried about being sued, then yeah, be very meticulous about that stuff, because truth is the absolute defense to libel. But I just wouldn't. I don't mean this in a bad way. You're not Kanye and you're not Taylor Swift, and basing. It's like when I tell people, like I tell you guys, don't judge yourself or measure yourself by writer standards. Do it by author standards. Like if you're trying to be a Kardashian, okay, then measure yourself by their standards, or a famous musician or a celebrity or whatever. Then that's the field you're playing on. You're not playing on that field, so it's not. I wouldn't worry about that. You know, make sense?
Cool, thanks.
Like
Yeah,
could you
makes
imagine? Like the example I love. I forget. I used this the other day. Could you imagine if I had security guards to keep paparazzi away from me? No one's. My wife didn't even want to take my picture. You know, but like, and so it's like just like, if you get real big, and I hope your book blows up and it becomes amazing. That'd be great. Then you can worry about that stuff. Then those are the problems. Those are the problems of success, and then you just have to worry about them in success, not before. All right, next.
Right. Okay. If anybody needs objections or roadblocks, just come to me. I got them.
We all do. We all do.
All right, we got one more here. This one is from Ricardo. What if you hear a comment you like from someone famous on a podcast? Are you required to quote them?
Required is an unusual word. Do you guys know? So this is a tempest in a teapot I know about. Did you guys remember like 6 months ago when some YouTuber, I can't remember her name, called out Jay Shetty? Do you guys know who Jay Shetty is? He's in a couple masterminds I'm in. So he's like he supposedly used to be a monk, and like he's just like one of the internet celebrities is really what he is. And he's like a mindfulness meditation person. And he, all the bubblegum personal development bullshit. He's one of those, right? And he's pretty big. He's got like millions of followers and blah, blah, blah. And so all of his content is stolen. And not just like, most of these personal development people take all their ideas from the Buddhists or from Dale Carnegie or whatever, right? But like he just rips fucking quotes off from people, just straight up. Like, I mean, stuff like a rich man will never, enter. A rich man will have an easier time moving through the eye of the needle than entering the kingdom of heaven, Jay Shetty. Like, it wasn't quite that bad. He didn't steal from Jesus, but close enough. And so this girl did an amazing YouTube video where she just went like, here's what Jay's quote that says Jay Shetty. And then she's like, oh, 3 years later, Philip McKernan said the same thing. And then like, she just again and again and again, and just fucking eviscerated this dude. Two things happened. He lost all credibility among the people who like pay attention to that shit and watch it. He also saw a huge increase in like his fan base and blah, 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 blah. Right. And like, this is like one of those things where it's like, it's the same thing with Trump or politicians. Like the blue team sees all evidence as endorsing the blue team and making the red team bad. The red team sees all evidence as making the red team good and the blue team bad. And so like, if you want to steal from other people, you can, right? I consider that theft. If you want to take from them, you can. And you probably won't get caught. And if you are, it might even help you. But probably there's a couple of prices you're going to pay. You're always going to know, right? Self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself. You will know you're a fucking thief and an unethical thief, number one. Number two, probably a lot of the people you want to respect you will figure it out eventually. And then they'll know you're an unethical thief. Jay Shetty was willing to pay the price. I'm not. It's a question for you. You know, like, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you what you have to do. Now, if you steal enough from the wrong people, then lawyers show up, right? Like, I'll give you a really good example. Roy H. Williams is like the highest paid living ad writer. If you ever get a cease and desist letter from a lawyer, or someone ever tells you they're gonna call you, I have because I've been sued 3 times, won all 3 times. I have a threat scale. If someone tells you they're calling their lawyer, ignore them. They're bullshit, and you'll never hear from them again. If you get a cease and desist letter from a lawyer, maybe take it seriously, maybe not, but probably 80 to 90% of the time, you can tell them to fuck off. It's when a lawyer sends a lawsuit with no preamble, that's when you need to worry, right? And so that's what Roy does. Roy is the best IP lawyer because he writes these amazing ads that sell crazy, and all these ad writers steal, rip off his shit. He has one guy who just like who finds all this stuff, and then they just get lawsuits in the mail. They get served, right? And so like, if you steal enough and you steal from the right person, you're going to get a lawsuit in the mail. And Roy doesn't settle. Roy comes after you until he has all your shit. And so no one steals from Roy anymore because they know they're fucked if they do, right? In fact, the way he's so brilliant. Roy doesn't take any of the money that he wins from the IP cases. He has a deal because he's the best IP attorney in the country. And his deal is you keep 80% of what you get. The other 20% goes to charities that Roy picks. And so he has this bulldog attorney who goes after fucking people and like just destroy, because it's all his money. It's so smart. When he told me that, I was just like, oh man, I wasn't going to steal from you, but now I'm really not going to steal from you. So make your own decision.